oh, wow, if I could ride a bike like that, yes. So that was one of the first kind of moments there. And I did, because I was carrying a book with me, um, I wrote it down, I described it in detail. And that was one of the first paragraphs that I had actually written about the Tempest in the Tempest series. Then the characters started to form, and then I started to see them, and it took me, I'd say, about 6 months to do the first draft, which I never write a tidy first draft. It's all over the place. And when I started writing, there was three main characters within the Tempest series that really stood out to me: the two Vikings and then the Roman general.
Mm.
And that was, I said to my husband, like, he's my guinea pig. I throw everything at him, and he's like, wait, he's like, no way, that's gonna work. He's vampires on a motorbike. Been done. I said, no, it hasn't. I said, you're thinking of The Lost Spice. It's a movie. That's different. And then we started watching some videos of 69 Eyes and that, And the more I started listening to Gothic rock, the more the Vikings actually started to appear more and more. So again, like that, I sat down and I started reading. And 6 months I had a first draft. Then I thought, right, I'm not going to touch this. I'm just going to continue writing. And I was writing 18, 20 hours a day. It was almost like one was consumed by them. They had to be heard, like I was their biographer and I was going nowhere until I had their story written. And that's
Wow.
really about.
That's actually, I have no words to say. That is really, really cool. And you actually do touch on a lot of stuff when it talks about, the Vikings and vampires in terms of, how they're presented in media and, lore. Now, of course, you're absolutely right. Vikings and vampires, they've always been depicted, well, at least for the Vikings, historically, as the marauders, the raiders, the pirates of the Northern Sea, which they were. But there's a lot more things you can do with the Vikings beyond the typical raider. Same thing you can do with vampires. They don't have to be the bloodsuckers or the gothic romance lovers. They could be whole new things. And I think that's a really nice way of like showcasing not only an author's approach to writing, but also how they can take, these archetype characters and
Yeah.
reinterpret them for a different story. So now let's actually go ahead. So after you've written the first draft of the first book in the Tempest series, what was the initial reaction like from friends and family? And at the time, did you do any betas or ARC readers for the first book?
I belong because I live in a very rural area here in Southern Ireland, in Cork, and we don't have a writers group. So I was kind of isolated in that, but we do have a very good book club. And it was my turn to host the book club. And I remember saying to them, a little bit unconventionally, I said, would you mind reading something that's not in book form? Two of them were like, well, it's not really the genre that we would read, but because we know that we would do it. And I said, oh, it's not my book. I was scared. I was terrified. And it was that moment where I started sweating profusely at the thought of my baby to people. So I gave them the printout, and 2, 3 weeks later, they came back. Now, we were having wine, and tongues were a bit loosened. And I remember saying to Margaret, and you're well. I said, what did you think of it? And she goes, who wrote it? When is the next installment? I can't wait. And I said, you really? Do you like it that much? And then the other girl said, well, there's one character I don't like, and that's the academic, Demas. I want to take him out, and I want to beat him over the head with a blue, you know? Girl said, like, today for the I was like, so you like them physically? I said, but the story, the plot line, what did you think of that? And they were saying, where is it going? you're dealing with subjects in that book. Like, I mean, it's heavy. The first one, Tempest Melitavis, is heavy on a religious theme. You know, it's about the hotel, the Cyclades. It's based on the Cecil, and I had followed a story about a girl who went missing at the Cecil, and then I'd read recently that that girl, her body was found, and then something later on about the lines that the Cecil was turned into affordable housing by the local council or something. And that's where I went with that in the Cecil, with the Cyclades Hotel. Now, obviously, there is a priest in it, and the love interest for one of the is Catholic. So everything in that is forbidden. I went all out with that, where there was going to be no conventions that I wouldn't break, that I wasn't with. If I wanted to tell the story and to do a story that I would read, I had to be true to the characters and I had to be true to the story. And I didn't want to offend my friends and those in the book club, and hence my reluctance in handing the manuscript over to them. And that was the one thing that they all felt a little kind of that moment where, oh, I'm not sure you should go there. And I'm like, well, did it put you off? But would you read it if there was a trigger warning? And none of them said, don't put any trigger warning on it. For the simple reason, if it offends people, it offends. But you have to be true to the story. And that's when I went with that. I thought, yeah, I had done it right. They liked it. And these are hard ladies to actually influence. You know, their reading material is very, very, you know, strictly, traditional.
All right. That's actually really good, and that as really, really awesome. And I think that's the first time I've ever heard an author say that they use a book club as a
Yeah.
way to market their book in a way where it's like, okay, are people actually going to like this? Let's actually test the waters. And it
Mhm.
seems that it was like overwhelmingly positive with a few critiques, of course. That's always very good. So, would you say from that initial reaction from your friends in the book club that in a way validated your goals you had for this series?
Absolutely. Hearing that feedback, that was fantastic. But again, there's always, and I think, with writers particularly, there's always that, that imposter syndrome where you think, well, I can't do this. I mean, I'm just a small person in a small little area in Ireland. I can't possibly do this. And then you're thinking, well, they're my friends, aren't they? They're not going to tell me the truth. So I went ahead and I got the book. I went along to draft to digital, and the book came out. And then the first kind of few days, the downloads went crazy and it was fantastic, but I wasn't hearing anything. It was almost like I was like, oh, is my Instagram working? Is Facebook working? Because I was hearing nothing. And
Mm,
then the DMs kind of started coming in. They're like, this is good. We like it. We like this character. We like that character. You know, the whole kind of story itself was terribly positive. Like, and then they were saying, well, when is next one coming out? And that's when I went down to my editor and I said, look, I've got a small problem. These books are already finished. They're done. I haven't started the rewrite on the ones towards the end of the series. Like, it was all done up to book 6. All the
mm,
rewrites done up to that, but the rest weren't. And I said, how can I get momentum on the thing and keep it going? Because for me, that was the main thing. I didn't want to let the readers who had got the book enjoyed it. I didn't want them to wait so long, because being in some book clubs on Facebook particularly, you hear the readers there how they won't invest in a series unless all of the books are published, because it can take such a long time. Now, granted, that's for traditionally published authors. It does take a wee bit of time to get everything together. When you're an indie author, you have a lot of more freedom in how quickly you bring out the books. But then again,
absolutely.
there's also more pressure on one as an indie
Hmm.
author to make sure that these books are perfect, that they're edited properly, they're, formatted properly, and that, you give your reader, a top class product. And I suppose it's one thing being an author and then you're in charge of the whole, marketing side of things. That I know me personally, up until the Tempest Religious series, I didn't see it as a business. And I suppose in a way I still don't, because it's, for me, it's not a chore to come up here to the library to start writing. I don't find it a chore. I find that, this is my go-to place, my happy place. I
Oh,
am when I'm in here writing. So what I find the chore is having to go down to the bookshops and kind of say to the managers or the buyers in there, would you please stock my book? Because I'm not that terribly forward of a person. I'm rather kind of introverted, and that, so for me, one has to get into public persona to do that. And that's the side of business and the writer that, I kind of part ways with. I'm not comfortable doing that.
absolutely. And you actually touched on something that we will cover also again, which, the mindset of an author, whether, are you a writer who is writing this as like a hobby, as like a little passion project, or are you in like the commercial mindset where you want to make this into a business? And
Yeah.
again, that will all be touched on in the business portion. But before we get to that, let's actually talk on something that you actually just brought up, and which is on imposter syndrome. Because you're right,
Yeah.
imposter syndrome is always going to be with authors from the get go, or any creative person
Mhm.
in any industry. And I definitely feel, especially now in today's digital age, it is a double edged sword, because yes, we can reach more people digitally, but when it comes to presenting our work and showcasing it, we are leaving ourselves exposed. We are raw. We
Yes.
are naked to these individuals who are now going to be reading something that is tied to us in some way, because all books belong, or I should say, all books have a facet of their author weaved into it. And that can be, a little bit intimidating, and the anxiety buildup is there. It's real. So I'm curious, and when you made the decision to publish the first few books of the Tempest series, did you sort of have that imposter syndrome, that heightened anxiety? And if so, or if not, what disciplined you to continue with this series?
Oh, it was there. I mean, the first thing in relation to, that the problem was when the book was finished, the first one, and decision came then to actually publish it. Um, I thought, well, you know, it's a you're being vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there into the world, and you're there, and people are going to critique. They're going to either tear it down, tear it apart, tear it to shreds, or they're going to love it. But at the same time, you've written a book. You put your heart and soul into it. You know, blood, sweat, and tears going into writing a book. But then, is that not selfish of you, the author, to not share that work with other people? Like, you believe in it so much. You've spent
Hmm.
so much time creating that, writing the story. Is that not selfish of you not to share it with other people? You know?
Right.
And I think, you know what, if you write something, you believe in it, regardless of how much doubt creeps in. One has to, you know, you have to give those characters an opportunity to shine, because you know what, you've taken that time out, you've sat down. Like, I can write 18 hours, 20 hours a day, and you sit down there. Surely those characters are worth somebody taking a chance on them. So why not?
Absolutely. That is very, very true. And again, you bring up another point. It's like, when you create something, you have the opportunity to share it. Now, of course, some people may not feel comfortable with
Yeah,
showcasing their work, which is absolutely fine. Some people write for therapy, which that
yeah,
is very, very true. But if your work can help other people as it has helped you, who are we to deny that to someone else? So
uh,
now, that leads into the business portion of being an author, the business mindset. So, as a little icebreaker, and as you said before, you have gone down the road of an indie author. But I
Yeah.
am curious, when you were doing your research, did you consider going traditional publishing, or was independent the beginning, the middle, the end? Like that was the only path you wanted to take with this series?
All right. Goes back to oh gosh, give my age away here now, but back around 1987, just before I went to Italy, um, I wrote a romance novel. Now, it wasn't terribly good, I mean, my goodness, when I look back at the printer, I cringe, but with every cliche imaginable. So I sent it on to a publishing house over here. I think they're called Harlequin in the US, but over here they're called Milton Boom. And I went to Italy and I had an absolutely smashing time over there. It was fantastic. And then I came back, and about 2, 3 months after I'd returned from Italy, there was a letter arrived from London, and it said, "Dear Ms. Daly, thank you for considering us. The premise is good. Unfortunately, don't ever subject the world to this." And I thought, oh my God, are you serious? And I remember showing it to my father, and my father was like, "Ah, that's just somebody's opinion, file it under experience and move on. Take some of the points that they've made and move on." And I was like, "But I can't. I mean, how can I write anymore when this is the way that they taught about it?" So closed that chapter of my life and I moved on. I was still writing, but it did affect me to that point where I thought, if that's the kind of rejection that is, I don't have a thick enough skin for that. So then in 2007, the whole independent publishing side of things came out. And with the likes of Amazon and that, they did make it very, very easy
Mm,
for. But then again, you also had the whole kind of vanity
yeah.
press that a lot of people would kind of get sucked into, myself included, with the very first book of the Glammatic series. And it went out to Vanity Press and nothing came of it until I took back wrote them an email and said, "Look, I'm not, publishing with you anymore. You take it down, so be back, whatever." And that was fine. Did that. And then I remember having to go through a whole series of editors, finding one that I could work with, finding one that would, that could see what I saw in the Glenmaker series. And then I went along and I published with Book Search, who was an imprint of Amazon. And again, like that, they were vanity. I hadn't heard of KDP at the time. I'm not terribly technically minded. And I was at the London Book Fair in 2010 and I attended a bit of a conference there. And there was a guy talking about ebooks. And I was like, oh, ebooks. And then he was like, well, you can publish through the likes of Amazon, their ebook section, KDP. And of course, that went right over my head until we came home. And that's when I thought, well, if I can get my book published without laying a fortune, and I can just, pay the editor, it goes up in ebook form. Okay, it's not physical book, you hold it in your hand, but it's some way in getting my book into the hands of readers without, kind of cutting out the middleman, the agents and the publishers and that, and that's what I did. That one rejection letter destroyed my confidence, and I thought never got through that again. And that's why, I always say to people, especially new writers that are looking for a way in, this is my experience. This is what I went through. Everybody's different. You do you. But self-publishing, as it was called back then, is now, the taboo isn't there. There's no, embarrassment in saying that you're an
Mm,
independent author. You've got more control over it. You've got more control over how quickly you publish your book. And in relation to a series, you can publish a book every 3 months. You can publish it every week. The series go on. You have complete control over it. The only thing you do need to ensure is that it is professional. It is properly edited, properly formatted. Your cover is care, you know, but you have control. And that
absolutely.
I would never go down. I am a proud independent author and I always will be.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So now let's actually talk about the audience and the readership because I definitely feel that is a major thing for us authors because, as I said numerous times on the show, viewers and listeners, when we write our books, we are the target audience first and foremost because we know the story better than anyone else. But when we share it with all of you guys, we really have to consider, okay, what genre of book does this actually belong to? What audience are we marketing towards, as well as the readership? So, and this is a three-part question, so just brace yourself. So, the first part is, do you have a good idea of who your audience is? The second part of the question is, at what point should an author consider their audience before publishing or after publishing? And thirdly, regarding the readership, which is YA, NA, and AF, where does the Tempest series fall under, and what have been the challenges to write for that particular readership?
Mm. Well, the first one is I write gothic horror, thriller, psychological, and fantasy. It's dark fantasy. It also falls under dark academia because of some of the intense, kind of subject matter. I use a lot of Latin in my books,
Mm,
and I learned that again during the pandemic. And there's a lot of darkness within my books. So anybody who my readers are, they like dark academia, they like horror, they like the gothic feel, and they like the thriller and the crime aspect of it. And obviously then there's the fantasy, you know. I'm going to answer the third part of the question now. In relation to when I wrote the Tempest Military series, it was written for me specifically.
mm,
And then the audience that it is geared towards now is anybody who likes fantasy. Yeah, there is a bit of romance in the story. There are romantic leads within it. But primarily it is crime driven. It is high dark fantasy.
mm,
For anybody who likes that, that's what the books are aimed at, the audience. And, like I say, I mean, I will read anything. I will give any author a chance, and I certainly, when it comes to reviewing books, I don't review books with the intention of giving a star rating. If I enjoy a book and if I get completely immersed in it, for me, that book is number one. And that's what I hope the audience, when they read the Tempest Elizabeth series, that's what I would hope that they would come away feeling that, they're living the story. Yeah,
mm,
as have come and some readers have said to me that they feel immersed within the books. And sometimes when they close the book over and then they come back from it, oh my God, I've got to go back to reality now. But please, get me back to the sixth. I want to go there. So that again, like that's all complete validation for the author. And I think, when you write for yourself, when you write and you're not thinking about publication, then you're going to write a killer book, and that's the way that's how I approach all of the books that I've written. I never write for publication. It's always for me first. And then of course, when you're polishing it up for the final push towards it, well, then that's when the business side comes in, and that's when, it goes through the mill, and you have
mm,
to plus. And that's something like, with my editor now with Tempest Relief coming out, I'm like, you're destroying, you're killing my baby here. Put that word back in. I want it. But that's what you is.
Absolutely, and absolutely. And that kind of leads into probably the biggest struggle for all of us authors is, this balancing act between our own authenticity and identity and
Yes.
individuality, while also showcasing the respect to the stories of the past, because all of our stories have some trinkling of elements from books and authors that we've read growing up. So for you in your series, have you been able to balance these two scales?
I hope I have. I'm the books when I was reading this, the books that I would have read during my writing of the Tempest would have been some of the ancients like Seneca, I would have read, Herodotus, Aristotle. And, I kind of, when I'm deep within a series or deep within writing a book, I tend not to read in the genre that I'm writing because it's all about, corrupting your own voice. And I felt like, by going with the ancients and reading those, not only was I interested in them, there was, it was down due to the language even. I wasn't going to be corrupting my own author voice. However, there is a lot of me in the stories, my likes,
Mm.
my love of Latin, my love of ancient Greece, my love of travel, antiques and all that. Of course, it's going to come true in the characters, you know, um, and that is why I think the stories have that authenticity about them because you are in them, and I think everybody, will put a lot of their lives in it. Like in Bjorn's story now, my love of Gothic rock is really in there. And that only came about, I would say, about 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago. I heard a band that I couldn't get enough of. Um, I saw them in a club up in Sweden, the 69 Eyes, and I thought, yeah, I love that. It's brilliant. It's got a great beat and that shit. Then I remember back in the 80s, a band from England called The Sisters of Mercy. And they're like, a teenager growing up in Ireland back in the 80s, we were not exposed to very many bands. It was all kind of country music or traditional music, and that was it. So there was no kind of Gothic scene. So I didn't grow up with a Gothic scene, but it was always there, in the background. When you'd see, we had a thing called MTUSA. It was
Mm.
video thing that came over here for 2 hours on a Sunday, and you were exposed to some music in that. So again, like that now, a lot of my interests, my personal interests, were coming in with the characters. Um, Lanny, he's a bit of a wine snob. Myself personally, I love wine. It sounds terrible. But yeah, no, I do. I love wine. I love old books. I mean, I'm most comfortable in a dusty old bookshop in a back street in Dubrovnik, than I am in a modern cafe, where all goes with that. So yeah, you do. You put your own likes, your own dislikes into your characters, and they do create some of the things within yourself.
Nice. And that ultimately, I think, now leads to a question that, well, rather a statement that you brought up earlier in the interview about writing during quarantine or return to writing during quarantine, which I actually think, according to one of my friends who made this post, argued that during those 4 years, it was a golden age for us indie authors because a lot of people emerged during that time. And that
Yeah.
was, of course, due to, escaping boredom and the monotony of, the lockdown. So I'm curious, and in your own opinion, in those 4 years of the lockdown, did a golden age emerge for indie authors?
Oh, I think definitely, absolutely, because with a lot, if you were an author and you were working in an industry that had to completely shut down, like say a shop assistant, there's only the basics, that were allowed, and certainly in Ireland, um, in schools, like I said, I was a preschool teacher assistant, and I lost my job because of the lockdown. And the first of the lockdowns that we had, we were told we were going to be out of work, closed down for 2 weeks maximum. Those 2 weeks went to 13 weeks, and then it went to over 2 years.
Mm,
And the children themselves suffer for it, but for me, I started writing. I went back to the craft that I absolutely loved. And I wouldn't have been able to devote all the time that I have been devoting to writing had I had to keep hold down a steady job, going out to work 7 o'clock in the morning, finishing at 7 at night. It couldn't be done, so something would have to give. So for me, I mean, a lot of people say, oh, the pandemic, it took so much from us, but it also gave something. It gave some people the opportunity to reconnect with their writing, to
hmm
reconnect with their art, to reconnect with themselves, and that you can't put a price on that. Okay, it took something from people. It took one's freedom. And that's something that you don't give much thought to until it's actually taken from you, but it's how you deal with that, how you deal with a lockdown like what we had. And I know there's a lot of countries it was quite severe, but in Ireland, we couldn't go beyond 2 kilometers, and you had to justify that to a policeman, like, is your journey necessary, madam? Yeah, you know, but it was that compliance. And then I'm thinking, I'm sat here at a desk and I've got the freedom to do, okay, your freedom being able to move around outside is gone, but the freedom to write, that's there. And
hmm
that is precious.
That is very, very powerful and only, very, very true. And I definitely think that was the case for a lot of us because depending where we were in the States, we really couldn't go out. We really couldn't travel. Like I was still in school. Well, I was in school. And then when the lockdown happened, I was actually sent back to California, Southern California specifically. And I was in my room doing work for the
Yeah,
next 2 years. It was only the last 6 months of the second year that I was able to go back and actually go through my actual college experience. But by that
that's good.
time, I had already finished three drafts for my three books, which are currently published, as well as my fourth book, which I am in the process of getting formatted. And, a lot of us, emerged during that time, and it was an eye opening experience. And
Yes,
yeah, I do have to agree that it was sort of like a golden age for indie authors, especially since everybody emerged, like all walks of life started writing, which I find absolutely beautiful. But from that moment, those 4 years, that definitely made the next question, or rather a statement, very, very powerful. So I'll give you context for this, and so I have been doing this show of audio and video for now a total of almost 6 to 7 years. And I've met now 123 authors in those 7 years. And I've learned a lot from all the people I've had on the show. And honestly, they've given me some great pieces of advice. And one of the advice that I will always remember is
mm,
for authors, there are two roads: to be an author, to be known as an author. One is dedicated to the story, the other is dedicated to the business. And both have their own hurdles, their own trials, their own obstacles, because they
yeah,
ultimately lead to the end goal: to be world renowned, to be internationally famous, which is, as I said, the end goal. But this definitely leads to a very hard truth in this industry, regardless if you're indie, hybrid, or traditional. And that is this: there's no guarantee your first book is going to be an overnight success. It is very, very true. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's accurate. There are exceptions to the rule, of course. There are authors whose first books did give them that status, and that is an incredible feat. But generally speaking, for your average author, your first book is not going to be an marketable success. It may be a mediocre success, and that's completely fine. Get your foot in the door. And you really have to consider, what kind of author you are. We talked about this, the mindset. Are you a writer who's just writing as a hobby, or are you doing this with the commercial mindset? So I turn over to you, Anne, to hear your thoughts on this topic where, yes, in this industry, it is true. There is no guarantee your book's going to be a success. It's a 50-50 chance. But that shouldn't stop you from writing and being an author if that's something you're truly passionate about.
Like being a writer, I mean, it's a magnificent thing. I mean, to be blessed with an imagination and to be able to pull these characters together and get them down on paper, that's fantastic. And the moment that you start writing down, the moment you put your name to that manuscript, you are a writer, whether you're a published author or whether you're just doing it for the love of the craft, the love of
Mm.
the. But again, there is an awful lot of luck involved in writing, and in getting your book published and having that book become an overnight sensation, having it made into a movie. I think all authors dream of that their book is going to be the #1 international bestseller. It's going to be picked up. Steven Spielberg is going to make a movie of it, and hey, press right off into the sunset, and you're going to become a legend. Reality doesn't happen. You,
Mm-mm.
right place, right time, perhaps, but there is so much luck attached to that. But that shouldn't discourage anybody. I mean, I jokingly say to my children, when my children, they're adults now, but I jokingly say to them, when they say, oh, you deal with immortals and all of that. I said, well, yeah, because that's what I do, and I'm very good at that. But think of it this way, I'm also an immortal because long after I'm kicking up the daisies, my books will be there. They'll be in a bookshelf somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
My words will be immortalized on paper and in the digital realm. But am I going to be an overnight sensation? Who knows? It's in the lap of the gods, really.
That is very, very powerful. And a lot of my friends feel the same way because at the end, our words are going to survive us. And in a way, as some of my authors have put it, they want it to be an inheritance to their kids.
Yeah.
That this is what I leave them, this is what they will have with them for the rest of their life. And I definitely feel, in the realm of the publishing world, especially for indie authors, a big thing besides marketing is networking, connecting with other people.
Mm.
And from these connections, they give us a whole bunch of other pieces of advice that,
Yeah.
grit transforms into talent. And one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten from networking is that, I've come to realization that, maybe your 10th, 15th, or 20th book that gets your name out there, and that's completely fine. Because if that happens, or when that happens,
Yeah.
you can tell your fans who have been with you since the get go that if you've enjoyed this book, check out all the others to see my growth as an author. And that comes from networking and the people who have, been by your side. So, Anne, I turn over to you. If you know anyone you like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you along the way, these could be family, friends, fellow indie authors you've connected on social media, or maybe local authors in Ireland or somewhere in Europe. Anyone you'd like to give a personal shout out to?
Well, there's quite a few. I mean, gosh, there's so many of them. One of the things I found, um, I took a personal break from writing in roughly about 2015 thereabouts, and I was very involved in, networking on Facebook and that, But one of the things I did find that the indie author community, they are absolutely wonderful. They are fantastic because the support that authors give to other authors, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there are when you may feel that element of doubt. Oh, am I doing the right thing? Is it worth continuing? And they're there, give you, you know, a friendly nudge. You know what? Yeah, you are doing the right thing. You are doing, and in this day and age where publishing is a dog eat dog, where you've got that level of support, it is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just like to give a shout out to all authors, newbies, you know, those that are established and everything. You know what? You're wonderful. Keep going.
Awesome. I'm sure everyone who heard that is going to absolutely love it. And that now leads to the final question, Anne. And you kind of already may have already answered it just now with this previous question, but let's see if you can add to it. So, with everything you've learned so far about the industry, about your own journey as an author, the books you've written, the friends you've met along the way, the struggles, the hurdles, everything, with all of that wisdom and experience you've gained, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors and writers who are watching and or listening to this interview right now?
Keep going, no matter what. You've got a story that's got to be told, and those characters will not let you sleep until you do their books for them. Keep going.
Awesome. Awesome. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. A huge thank you to A.D. McCabe for making her official debut here on the channel. Now, and before we end today, where can people find you on social media to reach out and connect with you, as well as purchase a copy or two of your book series?
All right, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram and Pinterest and Facebook under A.D. McCabe, author. And that might come up as Anna Daly McCabe, the other name. My books can be published or can be found on Barnes& and Noble, Kobo, anywhere from the Draft to Digital catalog. They're up there on that. The paperbacks can be found in your local bookshop. They can be requested, and they can be found on Amazon.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. And again, viewers and listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another successful author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. Again, a huge thank you to A.D. McCabe for making her official debut.
Thank you.
Hopefully, this will not be the last time we have her. Hopefully, we can have her back on the show for another series in the Tempest saga, maybe a spin-off or maybe a completely new story altogether. If you want to stay up to date, make sure to follow her on her social medias and the links provided down below. And as always, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, wishing you a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world.